Friendly reminder that I now have a Patreon. If you're interested in supporting me beyond these videos, this is the best way to do so now. From now on, patrons will be listed at the end of each video in a credits sequence, so be sure to show me some support. Thank you so much for watching anyway. On with the video. And spoilers for Poppy Chapter 3. I think the internet owes one big giant apology to Poppy Playtime, and that includes me. Poppy Chapter 3 released only a couple days ago at the time of this recording, and I was thoroughly into it from beginning to end. Poppy Chapter 3 seems to be the developer's response to the criticisms of the first two chapters, something that most game development companies should do that they just kind of don't really. What I mean is, Mob Games must have realized that they were missing out on a bigger fanbase by only really appealing to a younger crowd. I do not enjoy Poppy Chapter 1 or 2 because neither of them really have any horror to them outside of one or two sequences. Chapter 3 though? From beginning to a very tense end, everything is horror, and while I could go through each and every element that makes Chapter 3 one of, if not the best, mascot horror games in recent memory, I think I just want to hone in on one part of the game and really elaborate on what makes it as good as it is. The main antagonist, Catnap. But first, a bit of backstory. You see, Catnap was teased a long while back before we really had any idea of what Poppy Chapter 3 would look like, back when the theories surrounded Brawn and Sir Poops-a-Lot. Yes, it was a genuine theory that a shitting bear would have been the main antagonist of this chapter. All we really knew about Catnap in the beginning was that wherever Chapter 3 was bringing us, this was his realm, and he was the one who made it his church, his hallowed ground. Worshipping what exactly? That wouldn't be so clear just yet. But then something new started up. An ARG, and a new line of toys from Playtime Co. To briefly catch newcomers up on the story of Playtime Co., Elliot Ludwig was the founder of the company, which released many popular toys until their doors closed in 1995 for mysterious reasons. One day, every single worker in the factory just disappeared, with you, the player, being the only one remaining. It's your job to go back and discover the truth about what happened. And what happened? Well, it all ties into Playtime Co.'s experiments. For reasons that still seem a little vague, Playtime Co. had started something called the Bigger Bodies Initiative. This initiative would bring their toys to life as giants, leading to characters like Huggy Wuggy or Boxy Boo, giant, monstrous incarnations of their mascots. However, this came with a price, as each of these bigger body toys needed something priceless, a human being. So in order to make these larger toys, Playtime Co. came up with probably the single most evil fucking plot I've ever heard of in a video game. They started pretending to give a shit about orphans. They created Playcare within their facility, a large sprawling space that was notably referred to as an on-site orphanage. Kids could rest in home suite, visit the playhouse, or go to school. But this wasn't the end of it. One gondola ride up and they'd be on their way to the game station. The game station is where these orphans would be put to the test, going through physical assignments disguised as games to measure what toy they'd be best suited for. All under the watchful eye of, I refuse to say her first name, Longlegs. They'd then be returned to Playcare, and while they slept, they'd be abducted, and they would be turned into these monsters to be workers in the factory. There was a downside to this though. Although these big bodies didn't remember who they were, there were still some memories that bubbled to the surface. In an incident wherein Huggy escaped, he was found outside a family's home. These memories seem particularly strong in regards to things that make them feel safe, and that leads us to Theodore Granville. But first, let's talk about the smiling critters. Smiling Critters was another attempt by Playtime Co. to stay relevant, introducing this Care Bears-esque line of plush toys with many different faces and characters for all kids to enjoy. There was Dog Day, Crafty Corn, Kickin' Chicken, that smug asshole, Catnap.
Playtime Co. has announced the recall of all Catnap toys from the Smiling Critters line. His image cleared from all promotional material.
Oh, wait, I guess not. As Mob kept teasing the Smiling Critters line, Catnap was oddly removed from the lineup, hinting that there was something different about him. And that would absolutely come to fruition. In a Smiling Critters cartoon that was released, we were formally introduced to Catnap! While the other critters were trying to get some sleep on a particularly windy night, Catnap appeared. They would ask him to make them fall asleep, and he complied, dispersing red gas from his mouth that put them all to sleep. The actual toy had a similar effect. However, there were problems. Children who used the toy and who inhaled the gas would be filled with nightmares. The toy was quickly removed off of store shelves and recalled. But that wasn't the last of Catnap's gas. This is going to be a very gassy video, don't you worry, my friend. Theodore Granville was an orphan who was living at Playcare. He was a little infamous among the staff at Playcare because he had an imaginary friend who would seem to always get him into trouble. This imaginary friend, though, was a lot less imaginary than the staff would have liked to believe. At one point, Theodore managed to get his hands on a grab pack similar to the one the player wears throughout the game. This one happened to have a green hand on it, capable of transporting electrical charges in short bursts. Theodore and his friend tried to use it to escape Playcare. However, Theodore would accidentally shock himself with the hand, severely injuring him. Although his friend could have escaped on his own because of Theodore's actions, he returned the child to safety. With Theodore badly injured and otherwise a troublemaker, it was then that staff realized they had to do something, so they turned him into the bigger body version of Catnap. Catnap's job was to dispense his gas and lull other children to sleep, allowing for staff to move in and abduct the kids with no issue for further experiments. As we find in Chapter 3, these kids oftentimes didn't like falling asleep at night, and would even walk in on and overhear staff discussing their crimes. Catnap, though, didn't act just like staff thought he would, specifically in regards to the prototype. The prototype is currently the main antagonist of the entire Poppy series, having only ever been seen as a metallic hand and arm. What we do know is that the prototype's intelligence made him extremely dangerous, and he was the one responsible for starting the Hour of Joy, as it was called. The Hour of Joy is the mass slaughter of all the staff at Playtime Co. But in regards to Catnap, it was the prototype who was Theodore's imaginary friend. When around the prototype, Catnap would behave like a pet, but this eventually became a worship towards the prototype. When the Hour of Joy finally came, Catnap was among the toys to begin killing staff and children, but perhaps most strangely, other monsters. We can see evidence of this in plenty of places, but perhaps most damning is Dog Day. Dog Day can be found in the Playhouse as the last of the smiling critter big bodies. He apparently had turned against Catnap, which led to his dismemberment and torture in the Playhouse. According to Dog Day, his fate is the fate of all heretics against Catnap's god. And that just about leads us into Catnap's appearance in Chapter 3. According to little clues we get from Ollie, Miss Delight, and other characters, it seems like Catnap may have killed any of the children who weren't turned into toys, and only really spared the toys who were submissive to him and his control over Playcare. By the way, Miss Delight has her whole own thing going on. She was apparently locked in the school by Catnap as punishment. Since she was among the first to go insane, she actually killed and ate her various sisters as a way to stave off the hunger all the toys feel. Although they don't actually need to eat, a lot of them do feel the need to, such as Huggy and maybe even Catnap, since he does attack you with his mouth. So let's talk about what makes Catnap such a good horror game antagonist now that you know his backstory and where he comes from. I think the first and probably most important part of creating a good horror villain is the design of said villain. In the cases of characters like Michael Myers or the Alien, or hell, Catnap's contemporary, Freddy Fazbear, the design needs to land before anything else. What makes Catnap and many of the Poppy cast interesting is that they usually have more than one design. In Catnap's case, we were blessed with not one, not two, but 4 unique designs for the character, all representing the same overall idea, but going towards different extremes. Let's start with Cartoon Catnap. Cartoon Catnap is probably the most interesting non-monster design in all of Poppy to me. It had to stand out and be recognizable among a cast of characters that all look pretty much the same. And to be fair, when viewed next to each other, he doesn't stick out all that much. But maybe it's because his theming is very strong, or maybe because he has the darkest palette of all the smiling critters, he does come off as just a little wrong from a design standpoint. But more than that, something I noticed right away about Catnap is that although the other smiling critters are usually depicted with some level of expression or character, Catnap is almost void of that. I mean, just look at this art you can find on cardboard cutouts throughout the chapter. Bobby looks tender and nice. Bubba looks like he's having a provoking thought. Dog Day looks like he can barely fucking contain himself. Like, dude, calm down. This shit is not that serious. But then you see Catnap. He's the only one of the whole group whose cutout is facing dead ahead, with no tilt to his expression or anything. His arms, although splayed out somewhat, are still straight. There's just this idea that this one was always a little bit different from the rest. He's more stiff, has less of a personality to him, and I think that's great for setting up the more monstrous version of him later on, because it creates this idea that he is not going to be normal, or able to be reasoned with. He's just this way. Then there's the plush version of Catnap. This one is actually a different character from the big body version that this video is primarily about, but I figured I'd talk about it anyway. During the Playhouse section of the game, you can find yourself being chased consistently by these smiling critters plushies, one of whom happens to be Catnap. I just found that interesting, and it does feel like payoff for the people who bought the $38 plush that hasn't been made available yet. Then there's the monster Catnap, as he's been called. Monster Catnap is what I'd call the real Catnap. Their long, twisted body and exaggerated limbs help make this one look so much more grotesque than pretty much every other monster we've seen in the game so far. His long, extended mouth and his black eyes still give him that cartoony look, but the fact that they're both so filled with void, I think makes them come off as more threatening. It's the same effect a clown's smile has, where if you're in the wrong headspace, it can be really fucking creepy. Worse than just this more animalistic design is how Catnap moves, appearing to be capable of both quadrupedal and bipedal movements. He's just this extremely fucked up looking animal that moves a bit too human at times to really be written off like that. There's this really disturbing side to it that I think is best experienced by just playing the game itself. Then there's the gas Catnap. I'll be honest, I don't like it all that much. This version of me kinda just looks like that gif of Garfield's humanity being restored. It's this drier, pale white version of the monster Catnap, but with a smaller overall head and longer mouth. The longer mouth, I gotta admit, I don't think that that's scary at all. I think it detracts from what made him so threatening in the first place. This one is basically the same as Monster Catnap, but just trying too hard. It's still good, just not as good as the OG. But a good design on its own is not scary. It requires presence. If I showed you a picture of Jason Voorhees, you probably wouldn't find him all that scary. But if I put you in the same room as him, you'd be terrified. So what is it like actually encountering Catnap? The first time you can encounter Catnap in gameplay happens during Home Suite. In this level, you find yourself in a cloud of red dream gas, wandering a seemingly never-ending series of hallways as a radio tells you about the remains of a boy being found on the property of Elliot Ludwig. At one point, your guide, Ollie, tries to break through and calls you. When you pick up the phone, he tells you that you need to run. Turn back around and Catnap will be there, poking his head around the corner. It's a jump scare, but one you can almost miss with how subtle and quick it is. It makes for a great first encounter with Catnap in Home Suite. The rest of this section, Catnap isn't even a threat. You just feel like he's constantly stalking you, or worse, you're stalking him. He commands such a powerful presence here that every appearance of his going forward builds upon. You can see him walking around, hear him breaking things, find messages he's left for you. The entire time you're in Home Suite, you'll feel like he's almost upon you, but in reality, you're pretty much safe here. The next encounters you'll have with Catnap will be much more on the oh shit, oh fuck side of things. He'll steal your gas mask, try and kill you, and he'll sleep with your wife. I know, shocker, but he will do it. But even when you aren't directly face to face with Catnap, his presence is everywhere and felt by everything in Playcare. I brought up Miss Delight earlier. Well, let me elaborate on her. When you first encounter her, she says Catnap wouldn't like you being there. And while this might sound like she's planning a snitch on you, in reality, it's because she doesn't want him there either, which is why she has to go after you herself. Her panic in you potentially drawing him there is very high, and you can see her get more panicked the closer you are to escaping the school. She has a weeping angel mechanic, and as we find in one of her notes, this is because she believes if she holds completely still, you'll think she's dead and drop your guard. But she completely drops this idea just before you're able to escape, forcing you to have to crush her. Then there's Dog Day. Just the image of finding him hung up in a jail cell of all things is deeply disturbing. More so when you notice the belt around his waist. That belt is probably acting to hold his insides together to keep him alive during this torture. Since these monsters don't have to eat or presumably do much at all to stay alive, he could probably be kept like this indefinitely. The idea of, oh, he'll do this to me if he catches me, is planted here. What Chapter 3 is so good at is making Catnap feel present even when he's not in the room. Everything you see is not only under his control, it's also usually in a state of disrepair because of him. This makes the few times you do actually see him weigh a lot more. You're not looking at just another monster like Huggy or Longlegs, you're looking at the most violent monster yet, and one that has a well-earned reputation. Furthermore, you're as far away from prying eyes as you've ever been, and you're in the stomping ground of a territorial beast. No place ever feels quite safe, like you're always one hallway or room away from coming face to face with something else horrific. And I think one of the more out there things that makes Catnap so uniquely terrifying is that he's one of the few characters in the series to not have a voice, with a big asterisk on that. Poppy, Ollie, Dog Day, Miss Delight all have a pretty good amount of dialogue in this game. You can also find tapes or messages where you hear plenty of other characters. In this chapter, only a handful of characters never speak. First is Kissy Missy, but that may be because the type of toy she is incapable of speech, just like Huggy was. The other is Catnap, but Catnap is capable of speech. We've only ever heard Catnap speak twice. The first line is this. And the second line is this. Something about the directness of these lines and the way they're said is so horrifying to me. They aren't said angrily, happily, or anything like that. They are monotonous, almost machine-like. It's also worth mentioning, only one of these lines can actually be heard in a normal playthrough, and that's the line where Catnap actively threatens us to leave Playcare. I have no idea where the other line even comes from, and hearing it makes me wonder if this may have been a beta version of the voice. The one in the final product does sound a little different, but both are similar in message and intent. But what is a main antagonist without a final confrontation? And this is where I'm going to have to say something a bit more negative about Catnap. Not even specifically about the character, but about Chapter 3 in general. This game is very hard, and that's a good thing, but you can tell where some pieces the fat was trimmed. One of the most glaring in my opinions is the final fight against Catnap. In this fight, you are given a panel with 4 battery ports, each of which will need to be filled over the course of a timer. Surrounding you are 4 hallways, each with a device that allows you to block the hall off temporarily by using steam. Given your limited amount of batteries, as the fight progresses, more and more pathways will open up for the main threat, Catnap. How does Catnap work? Catnap will be wandering the halls outside of the center room, with many shapes that resemble him as well. When Catnap approaches, you'll have to fend him off. If he approaches left of the console, use a jump pad to get up, and then use your green grab pack hand to transfer energy to this button. If he comes from the right, open this gated door and do the same thing. Sometimes you'll see Catnap coming, but it won't actually be him. Instead, there will be gas in the shape of his silhouette. To confirm if it's the real Catnap or not, you need to fire a flare through the gas. He can also attack you from above through this hatch in the ceiling. So, what's the problem? Well, honestly, I think that this fight, although hard, definitely feels like Mob did a last-minute rework to get the game out on time. Let me put it this way. Aside from the 2 halls ahead of you, you have 2 to your left and right. I must have done this fight maybe 8 or 9 times, and only one of those times did Catnap ever even attempt to attack me from one of these halls, heavily favoring the 2 ahead of you. It feels like Mob may have made this boss fight too difficult, so they just reduced the chance of Catnap coming from these 2 sides by a huge amount. But at that point, why even bother having those 2 sides at all? The fight itself is incredibly tense and fun for sure, even if it did have me raging a bit. But the real worst part of it has yet to come. Once you finally charge the computer fully, you need to grab the electricity forming above. Just as you do this, Catnap attacks in a cutscene, and then you die.
Oh, there we go. Fuck yeah. You win? Fuck you, Catnap. Yeah, I won. Wait. Oh. Did you get got? You're fucking kidding me.
Yeah, as it turns out, this cutscene is also a QuickTime event. So if you beat Catnap here but don't realize this is just a QuickTime event, congrats stupid, gotta do it all again. It's just baffling that this is even a thing. I don't get it. Is it because your reticle doesn't disappear, you're supposed to just know that you still have some control? It doesn't even fire where you aim. It always hits Catnap's mouth. This was a part of the game I just had to say that's really dumb and smells like bullshit to me. But that is probably my only real complaint about the chapter. Not to mention the ensuing scene is so good. Catnap tries to attack you with gas after getting a bad shock, only for the electricity surging in his body to light the gas on fire, enveloping him in his own flame. As he burns up, he notices the prototype's arm. In one final move of prophetic worship, Catnap sacrifices himself to become a part of the prototype, leaving an end to the best antagonist this game has had yet. So, where does this leave Poppy Chapter 4? Looking ahead, Chapter 3 makes it pretty clear that whatever is next is probably going to be the last of it. We've seen pretty much every horror there is, and all that's left is the one who started it all. That or we get a random Boxy Boo chapter. But the way this chapter kept emphasizing Catnap's connection to the prototype, and the way it ends with Kissy fighting something above the player, it makes me believe that whatever is next is final. So a gold star for you, Chapter 3. And now my indie horror tier list that I got from Isaac the Baddest looks like this. If you take anything away from this video, it should be why Catnap works so well, not just how. Catnap works well because Mob Games spent the time and effort to make him feel integrated, not just into the game, but into the story unfolding, the one you are taking a part in. They gave him a great design, obviously, but the idea that he was always somehow out of place, and he's the source of the corruption here, makes him out to be almost the Freddy Krueger of this place that is your nightmare. Catnap rules the entire chapter from beginning to end. He's always a threat just out of sight, and when you finally do see him, it should be clear just how outmatched you really are. If you enjoy this video, please be sure to subscribe and check out my last video where I talk about the new trailer for FNAF Into the Pit. I'm Demuted. Peace.